Marquee.
Just over 2 years ago, there was a chat, an excitement, and interest steadily building around TNA, a company that had been slowly drowning for the last 4 years. The company was on the up. There was a renewed interest and new fans were starting to tune in, and this was all caused by a Mel Cruella de Vil lookalike that had an accent that spanned from England to Jamaica, whose actions would have seen any normal man committed. The man who has been creating something that's been missing from wrestling for over a decade, that something is a buzz, and that man is Matthew Hardy. This is the story of the Broken Hardys in TNA. Just before I begin, please subscribe to the channel and check out my last 2 videos, 10 wrestlers who are complete failures in TNA, and 6 the most awful, worthless, pathetic factions to appear on TNA programming. And there's lots more TNA content to come. Without further ado, let us commence. It's crazy to me that this following story will be entering around the main character of Matt Hardy. When we're talking about the Hardy Boys, Matt was in his brother's shadow for his entire career up to this point. It all started when Matt began his second stint with TNA, and he didn't really impress during the first run, so I was less than optimistic about his chances here. It was all going as expected as could be for Matthew Moore Hardy. Wow, Moore. I never knew that was his middle name. There's always so much emphasis on Nero, but never on Moore. Anyway, Matt and Jeff had reformed the Hardy Boys and were competing for the gold. And whilst this was all great, we've seen it before. It was hardly evolutionary, or should I say hardy. They were having great matches and winning the tag team gold, and everything seemed normal. But a dark storm was on the horizon which would soon render their tag team reign obsolete. The younger Hardy Boy was being a daredevil as usual, and crashed his bike whilst performing a stunt in their back garden. This meant Matthew was left alone and had to relinquish the tag belts. This all made him rather upset as his face swelled up and his head shook with disappointment. He was becoming a failure. Matthew was determined to right his wrongs and make something of himself. He was still in his early 40s, and a lesser man would have grown a beer belly, shaved his hair and gone to eat pasties at the pub with the other men. But no, Matthew fought on, and he started challenging for the world title, a belt that had eluded him his whole career. He had been forced to stand and watch his younger brother flaunt his success for years, and inside his body an internal rage had been building, growing, and there would one day blast all over, not over Jeff's face, but over the wrestling fans who had branded him the Marty Jannetty of the tag team. Then, one day it finally happened. He won the big one in front of his family in Carolina. He pinned Drew Galloway for the world title. He was the man. He was nearly sick everywhere as he realised what he had achieved, but it wasn't to last. The next day at TV, EC3 filed an injunction which stopped Matt from appearing on TV with the belt, and he was left with no choice but to relinquish it. Matt was dying inside. His family were embarrassed of him. Jeff was still better than him, and his son Maxwell had a better hairline than him. But eventually Matt's persistence paid off and he won the world title after becoming the first man to beat EC3 in singles competition, after EC3's bodyguard Tyrus turned on him. But the fans now hated him. Was it not possible for Matthew to be a success and to be loved by the audience? Everything was going together perfectly. He wanted to flaunt his success just like his out-of-control brother Jeff. Matthew soon dragged his family along to the TNA show, and he also took the former Funkasaurus Tyrus with him. Matt was finally guaranteed to look slim on TV, stood next to Tyrus. Tyrus was also good at holding the baby, and had optional breasts to feed from. Matthew was wearing fancy suits and had gelled his greasy hair, but it still didn't seem right. Something was off, and renaming himself to Big Money Matt just wasn't helping. He still came off like a depressed badger. 2 months later, Matthew had lost the world title, and he had noticed his wife passing glances at other wrestlers. Jeff was ignoring his phone calls, and Tyrus wasn't sharing his fries with Matthew. Life sucked. He had several rematches for the title, but failed each time. Then he reached his lowest low when he was put in hospital by his own brother following an I Quit match. As he lay in hospital contemplating what his life had become, he started to grit and grind his teeth as his face turned red and tears rolled down his flabby cheeks. He curled up in a ball crying. This was breaking point for Matthew, and things were about to get interesting in TNA. A couple weeks later, Matthew, dressed as a Jeff Hardy creation, Willow, surprised Jeff in the ring, revealing his new clothes and his half-bleached hair. Matt didn't care how insane he looked as he beat down Jeff in the ring, hoping to permanently delete him. Matt decided Jeff was no longer worthy of his name and therefore would only refer to him as Brother Nero. He didn't deserve his name as he had caused so much pain and suffering by making Matt broken. He was back in TNA and wouldn't rest until he had shown Jeff who the better Hardy was. And like so many moments for mankind, war was inevitable, and it could only be ended in one way: bloodshed. Broken Matt and Nero would fight it out in a Full Metal Mayhem match, and next a 6 sides of steel match with Matt losing both times. He just couldn't take it. Was this always to be his fate in life, being second best to a skinny multicoloured hair hippie? Woe is me. He could take no more of Nero, and that's when stage was set for final deletion, where the winner would take ownership of the Hardy brand. Matt unleashed a swarm of drones to Jeff's house, headed by Vanguard 1, Matt's trusted best friend and drone. The stage was set, and as the day turned to night, Jeff arrived at the ring. Matthew discovered a Roman candle at the side of the ring and started firing it into Jeff's face with the intention to permanently maim him. Matt believed he had Jeff pinned at one point, but it was just Senor Benjamin in a willow costume for some reason. Jeff ended up being burnt and falling from a giant Hardy symbol, and Matt had finally achieved the pin. Jeff, now going by the name of Brother Nero officially, started accompanying Matt to the ring, and being his obsolete mule and looking pathetic. Matt was now the Alpha Hardy, and Brother Nero was forced to endure the pain Matt had faced all those years. Brother Nero had started coming round to Matt's way of thinking, and they started tagging up just like the old days, but this time Jeff would not be the one getting the glory. This eventually led to Delete or Decay, where the Broken Hardys furthered their feud with resident scary evil monster faction The Decay. Matt then won the tag titles of Bound for Glory in the Great War. He was popular, he was better than his brother, and he was in the main event, and it only took Matt getting broken to make it this far. The Broken Hardys would then feud with the DCC, but Matt knew they were just jobbers and put them in their place every time. He was on top of the world, and realising TNA wasn't big enough to hold his talents, he started teleporting to other wrestling promotions to defend the gold. Matt's ego couldn't be contained and he needed a bigger stage. A heated contract debate was going on behind the scenes at TNA. They wanted to renew the Hardys as they were the hottest thing in wrestling at the time, but they couldn't get them to re-sign. Later on that day, a routine Hardy teleportation to another company went wrong and the Hardys were zapped away, but the tag belts landed into the hands of the Decay. This was the last time we would see Broken Matt in TNA. His broken brilliance lasted around 9 months in TNA as the buzz faded away from the product. TNA would go on to claim they owned the rights to the Broken gimmick, and the Hardys would battle them on social media for the gimmick with a potential court battle on the horizon. They claimed Jeremy Borash was responsible for the idea, but the Hardys have discredited that and said there were multiple creative minds involved with the gimmick. Most of this stuff was shot at the Hardys' compound and they also did some of the camera work. After an almost year-long fight, with TNA in severe financial difficulties, Matt would win the battle, and now he owns the full rights to the gimmick, which he would go on to take to WWE. If you ask me, this was the right decision. However, it was sad times for TNA when the Broken Hardys left for the WWE. It truly felt like their last major stars were leaving the company and TNA was now left with no star power. The Broken Universe, so many random moments and storylines coming out of it. You had things like the random emergence of the popularity of Senor Benjamin, who was Matt's caretaker. You had King Maxwell, who became very popular. Vanguard 1, the dilapidated boat, Jeff Hardy being an obsolete mule. The list goes on really. And of course, who can forget Delete? Matt created his own universe and completely reinvented himself, and for that I say bravo. It may not have been everybody's cup of tea, but it was certainly mine and I miss it. Were you a fan of Broken Matt? Has the buzz now faded? Has the Woken gimmick lived up to your expectations? Let me know in the comments section down below and don't forget to subscribe.